I think we're live, Andrew.
Yeah, I think we should get started. My name's Andrew Ross. I am on the organizing committee for Palestine Writes Festival, and I'd like to welcome you all to this session. I hope you've been enjoying the festival events, and we're in for a treat with this particular panel. And then I hope you stay on for the final session of the festival afterwards, which starts almost after the end of this one. The panel's being recorded, and it will be available for your friends or associates who might have missed this. It'll be available on the website 48 hours after this broadcast. Translation's also available simultaneously. All you need to do is click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. And so now I have the pleasure of introducing Victoria Brittain. She is a journalist and an author who has lived and worked in Saigon, Algiers, Nairobi, London, and Washington. She's reported from more than 24 African countries and made many visits to the Middle East, especially to Palestine and Lebanon. She worked for The Guardian for more than 20 years, but has also written for numerous French and Anglophone outlets. She was an advisor in several UN reports and was an associate in the Crisis States program of the London School of Economics. A translator for President Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, she also gave lectures in the Namibian Liberation Movement camps in southern Angola. She's written, co-written, and edited books on Southern Africa, and also books and plays on Guantanamo Bay and the impact of the war on terror, including Shadow Lives, the Forgotten Women of the War on Terror. And her most recent book is Love and Resistance in the Films of Mai Masri, which is a book that prompted the discussion we're going to be able to hear today. That book is now available on the Palestine Writes Festival bookstore, along with the books of other presenters at the festival. And I do encourage you to visit the bookstore and other vendors. If you click on the ACA showroom, you'll be able to do that. So I'm going to pass this over to you, Victoria.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. You must have done some assiduous Googling to have dug out so many bits of my past that I had no idea you would know about. Anyway, thank you for it, and good evening, everybody. It's a great honor for May and I to be part of this amazing and unique festival, and our warmest congratulations to everybody who's involved in it. Probably May doesn't need any introduction from me, and I'm sure that most, if not all of you, have already seen some of her work. But I just want to say that I'm not the only person who describes May as a true auteur. And that's really what she is. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with her. But I hope that the session that we've devised for you will allow you to see her work as a unity. All her work is related and linked. I think of it as like a quilt or a tapestry or a collage with many layers. And as you probably know, her documentaries span 40 years of the linked history of Palestine and Lebanon. Years of Israeli bombing, invasions, a 22-year occupation of parts of Lebanon, and the two intifadas, the uprising of Palestinian children and youth. And her award-winning feature film, 3,000 Nights, is set in 1982 inside a women's prison in Israel. Now, throughout these very blood-soaked years, the normalization of Israel's occupations, incarcerations, tortures, exiles, disappearances, assassinations are the inescapable texture woven into Palestinian life. It's a mark of how May and her meticulous work is valued in her own artistic community that my book has paintings, photographs, and poetry donated by some of the most distinguished of Palestinian and Lebanese artists, Samia Halabi and Ayman Balbeki, poet Natalie Handel, and Palestinian and Lebanese photographers, Emila Shrawi, Ramzi Haider, and Marwan Tata. And I am enormously grateful to all of you. I have to show you, as you can see, one of these artworks. It's from Samia Halabi's 2017 unforgettable portrait of Ghassan Kanafani, assassinated by Israel almost 50 years ago, with his niece, Lamis. Here you can see her just nestled in the poppies at the bottom of the painting. On Wednesday, in the session on literature in the time of erasure, you will have heard Ibrahim Nasrallah say, "Reading Kanafani changed my life." And then on Friday, we had an exceptional session remembering and linking the politics of Kanafani with those of James Baldwin. Memory, like this one, and its precious role in building identity in the face of more than 100 years of the ongoing attempted destruction of Palestine and of Palestinian identity. It's the most important theme of my book. In 1982, during the invasion, the Israeli army looted the precious archive of the Palestine Cinema Institute in Beirut. And in 2006, they bombed and totally destroyed the secretive, notorious Khiam prison in what had been occupied South Lebanon for 22 years. As my colleague Alan Goresh wrote, the memory of the camp itself and all its traces of the tormented people once in it had to be rubbed out. A rule as old as Western colonialism itself holds that colonized people have no faces and names. We're not meant to remember. But Mai and her late husband, Jean Chamoun, were on the ground filming these many war crimes. And in their work, these Palestinian and Lebanese memories and the faces and names will never be erased. I want to highlight 3 more themes of Mai's work: inspirational women, resistance by communities of seemingly ordinary people to injustice, and surviving incarceration. You'll see all these in the images we've chosen from her films. Now, exceptionally, in Mai's work, all this overwhelming violence is seen mainly through the eyes and the lives of children and through the iconic women who often appear in more than one film. And Mai has a running theme of the transmission of oral history to Palestinian children from older generations, elderly neighbors, shrewd wounded fighters, parents released from prison. And the children in the films are revealed, living in their dreams and their imagination, reading from their private diaries, and as a group, painting brilliant panoramas of imagined Palestine full of birds and flowers, and filming each other's hopes and ambitions on digital cameras, which Mai gave them. Mai is an insider in these lives, and the intimacy of the family Palestinian scenes she shows is unique. And love, kindness, and beauty are hallmarks of these scenes and these films. Hence the title of my book, Love and Resistance in the Films of Mai Masri. Now, Mai, over to you. My first question is, of course, let's start with 1982. In Beirut, you had recently come back from studying film in California. You'd come back to the city where you'd spent your formative years, and you were planning to meet with Jean and actually start working with him. You were not then married. But in fact, what you had to start filming together immediately was the enormity of the horror you found yourselves living in, the Israeli bombing, the invasion, the siege of Beirut, and the massacres in Sabra and Shatila. All this set you on your life's course. Could you describe how this experience impacted you then and how it's stayed with you ever since?
Thank you, Victoria, for your beautiful introduction. And I just want to say how glad I am to be part of the Palestine Writes Festival. This amazing event, it's so inspiring. Back to 1982, yes, I just come back from the US, from San Francisco State University, where I had been studying film, arrived in Beirut to meet Jean, and then the Israeli invasion began in June 1982. It was an overwhelming experience. I mean, Beirut was bombarded by land, sea, and air. Water, electricity, food supplies were cut for 3 months. Thousands of people killed, but we began filming immediately. It was overwhelming and also very painful, but an amazing, it taught me a lot as a person and also as a filmmaker. In a way, I mean, it was such a hard experience. For me, it was like baptism by fire, because it prepared me for all of the challenges and difficulties to come. Because all the films we made together, whether I made them with Jean, because I made several films with Jean over the coming years, or in the future, the other films I made were always during times of war, invasions, intifadas, resistance. So I think what I learned in these first years, and we made films in South Lebanon, Women of South Lebanon, we made the film Under the Rubble, War Generation Beirut, about the young people growing up in the Civil War. It set the tone for all of the films I made afterwards. And that, I think the main thing is how you build trust with the people you're filming, living with the people for long periods of time, giving voice to those who don't normally have a chance to express themselves, character-driven storytelling. And I think also how to seize the moment, because we've been living through very intense and historic moments. How do you seize that cinematically? Oh, I forgot. Let me share a screen shot of us shooting in Shatila camp right after the massacre of Sabra and Shatila in the years, because there was also the war of the camp. So this is me and Jean in the rubble of Shatila. But I think it expresses a lot that kind of raw experience and being like grounded and rooted.
Thank you, Mai. Can we fast forward 5 years to the first Intifada and the first film you made on your own? Could you tell us about your return to Palestine after so long and why you chose Nablus to film in?
For me, after '82, the most powerful, I think, experience was the return to Palestine during the first Intifada in 1989. And it was my first return since I was a child when I left Palestine. It was the very first time I returned. And it was during the Intifada. Why Nablus? Actually, Nablus and Gaza were the main hubs of resistance at the time. And in the end, the film I had planned to make, it changed radically because Nablus was under total siege again. And it was a closed military zone. It was almost impossible to access. They didn't want any cameras or journalists to witness what was going on. There were thousands of soldiers. But all the events were actually in the neighborhood where my relatives live. And I managed to get in with a crew secretly through the back roads. And we were hiding in my uncle's home. Here you can see. This is like one of the first images that were taken, because we were filming from the windows, hidden inside, and filming the soldiers breaking into people, arresting people from their homes. So the film I set out to make changed. It became more a journal of a daily life under occupation. And the two main characters were two children, Hannah and Fadi. And this is a picture of Hannah, who's 11 years old, a neighbor in the same building where I was. She's drawing images from daily life, the Intifada. And this is a lot of children. This is what they were participating, expressing it in their drawings, in their play. Our neighbor also had just been killed by the Israeli army, and the whole, everyone, it was like a rebellion inside the Intifada. You know, it was very powerful. And for me, being there with a camera, I felt empowered. I felt also it was, in a way, I was reconnecting with that childhood that had been interrupted, and also reclaiming, I felt, and connecting with the Palestine became for me like real, in the sense that it was no longer like an image. Living in Lebanon in exile, you know, many Palestinians, for them, Palestine is more of an image, but being in Nablus, being in Palestine at that time during the Intifada, everything became very real, a land, a people, that connection and sense of identity for me was very important. And this film is one of, for me, I learned again a lot from this experience, both, I mean, it helped create, I think, my sense of identity, but also how to make a film in impossible conditions, because this film was filmed totally, almost clandestinely, in secret. But I learned that you don't have to tell the whole story. You can focus on a small story, a neighborhood, details, and this way you really can tell a larger story. And a lot of the things you don't see, you know, the camera a lot was like filming from the windows, the sounds, all this brings really the feeling, the intensity, I think, of that daily life under occupation.
So after that film, sorry, Children of Fire, you went on to make your second film in the trilogy of Children in War. And this was the first one you made in Shatila, Children of Shatila. Can you show us some images and tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, after working with children in Nablus, for me, I felt that working with children and the idea of seeing through their eyes really was, I tried in Children of Shatila to see through how they would film their own reality, tell their own stories. Digital cameras were a brand new phenomenon at that time. This was in 1998. It was the 50th anniversary of the Nakba. And this film was actually made for Channel 4 as the 50th anniversary commemoration of the Nakba. So the idea was to, for me, was to see through their eyes, and their voices. And immediately when I gave them the camera, it was like something brand new. They were like discovering, it was like they're even seeing their reality, as if they were seeing their own reality for the first time. And playing with it, and also interviewing the elders. And here's a scene where they are speaking to an elderly Palestinian and asking him about Palestine and about being displaced from Palestine and about the experience resisting, also creating the resistance in exile. And he said something really powerful to them. He said, even if 100 years pass, I will never forget Palestine. Promise me this, that you will never forget Palestine. And to me, that, I mean, I think that's the theme, and the idea how memory is passed from generation to generation, and how the sense of identity of each generation is recreated through this memory that's passed from generation to generation. So the main two characters in this film were two children, Isa and Farah. And Isa actually has a very, his story is quite powerful, because he was hit by a car and lost his memory. So throughout the film, he's searching for his memory, talking to people, asking questions about the past. And it was for me a way of also, I felt this was like symbolic of the whole relationship to memory and collective memory, and safeguarding this memory. And also, I wanted to tap into the imagination of children. And that's what's so amazing of working, for me, to work with children, because of their spontaneity and because of their imagination mostly, because it speaks to me as a filmmaker and gives me the opportunity to build on it poetically. And here is a shot of Isa on the horse, a white horse in Shatila. Shatila, actually, there are many horses because it's not far from the race course in Beirut. So when these horses get old, they retire in Shatila and they become workhorses. But to Isa, when he talks about the horse and how he described one of his dreams about going to the seaside on the horse. And actually, here's a scene where the children are leaving the camp and going to the seaside, but passing through the fancy neighborhoods of Beirut, which is such a contrast to the camp, Shatila camp. So poetic. He imagines himself a prince riding a horse, you know, and it's such a contrast between the reality and also the imagination is so free. And for me, this is really poetic. And I tried in these films to access that poetic side and also at times magical realism, because I feel that to me, documentary is not just about recording reality, but it's also accessing the many layers, the poetry of everyday life.
So in your third film of the trilogy, Frontiers of Dreams and Fears, the first image we're going to see is of a child who you always describe as the poet of Shatila. And in this film, Frontiers of Dreams and Fears, you pulled off a completely extraordinary feat of framing children from both Shatila and Dheisheh in the West Bank, linked them inside two major historical moments: the retreat of the Israeli army from its 22-year occupation of South Lebanon and the Second Intifada. Can you talk to us a bit about these children and also about the amazing logistical feat that we'll see in a couple of frames further on that you pulled off?
Yes, this is the third in the trilogy. Some of these children even appeared in Children of Shatila, but I made this 2 years later in 2000. Muna, for me, she's the poet, the young poet of Shatila, because of her words. They're so poetic, they're so meaningful. Her imagination, again, and she talks about dreaming of being a bird. She doesn't want to be a butterfly because a butterfly is trapped in a book, but a bird is free. And birds for Palestinian, you find that theme recurring a lot. And in several of my films, it comes back, but it's actually with Muna, it's present. The bird represents freedom, represents breaking through the boundaries and the prisons, and really I was able in this film to build again on the contrasts of that imagination and beauty and the difficult and the horrific conditions of everyday life, you know, that contrast. The other young girl in the film is Manar from the Dheisheh camp, which is another very it's a very interesting camp, because this camp was also besieged for many years during the Intifada. They actually built a fence around it even before they built walls in Palestine. This was the first camp that was completely entrapped in a wall and gates, iron gates. And the walls of this camp are the murals everywhere that tell the story of Palestine, of resistance, of the dream of return to their villages. And Manar is a bright and very talented girl. They met, Manar and Muna and their friends, through the internet. And in year 2000, the internet was a brand new phenomenon also, and had just reached the camps. And it was the opportunity to reconnect, for Palestinians to reconnect with with Palestine, with their relatives, with other Palestinians in Palestine and in the exile. And I found that idea very powerful, the idea of connecting and the possibility of sharing and friendship that arose. But when in 2000, there was also the liberation of South Lebanon in on May 25th of year 2000. And that was really one of the most, I think, historic moments that I've ever experienced. And I was able to bring the children from Palestine and Lebanon, the refugee camps, to meet at the border. And in those first few days after liberation, thousands of Palestinians were trying to reach the border. It's very difficult, of course, on both sides, almost with all the checkpoints on the Israeli side. Even the Lebanese side, it's difficult because pouring onto the border with the barbed wire. And I think this image is powerful because you can see how they're trying to reach the hands across the barbed wire. And the barbed wire is so symbolic here. And bringing the children was a very difficult feat because there were no telephones or connections, really. It was through friends, and I was able to bring up the bus of the children from Dheshe camp to the border. It was almost miraculous, but they finally arrived. And here's an image that, to me, it really encompasses a lot of that feeling. Here are two brothers, a brother and a sister, meeting for the first time in 52 years because they had been separated in 1948 in the Nakba. And you can see them, they're like old now, and they're meeting for the first time, and the tears in their eyes and the joy. So that really encompassed everyone's feelings. We were crying, even my team, my Lebanese crew, we were like in tears, the barbed wire, the emotion, feeling that we were living historic moments, because this moment on the border really gave a lot of hope for Palestinians, of the possibility of return, the possibility of liberation too, because this is one of the rare times any Arab land was liberated ever. So I was able to film quite a bit on the border. Here's Manar on the border with children on the other side with Muna. Here's another image of the children. This is on Shatila children, Samar and Muna and the whole group from Shatila with the other group from Ibda. For me, I'll never forget these moments. I think this is the power of film, of the image, to be able to capture moments otherwise that would be erased with time. Because a few days after I took these images, this whole area became a closed military zone. I think the Israeli army realized the danger of hope, what hope can really, can be a very powerful tool. So all meetings, reunions at the border, family reunions were forbidden, and it became a closed military zone. But these images remain. I think this is the power of, again, film and safeguarding memory and writing also history that's not written.
Well, that's exactly what you've done with your films. You've captured this history. And let's move on to two of the amazing, iconic women that I spoke about, who are like a leitmotif through several of your films.
Yes, I'd like to speak about Khadija Herez, who's one of the first women I filmed. This is the second film I made with Jean after the film we made in the siege in '82. This one's called Wildflowers, Women of South Lebanon. And it's about the resistance of women in South Lebanon during that period of occupation, Israeli occupation. And Khadija was imprisoned in Nevi Terza prison, which is the same prison I later made the film about, 3,000 Nights. And she's they took her from South Lebanon to Palestine, to this prison, Israeli prison, full of Palestinian prisoners in '82. So she was the first person to describe this prison to me and this republic of women. She said they were so powerful. These Palestinian women prisoners, they really gave her strength. They really, it was a very intense experience for her. And Khadija is actually a very interesting woman. In this, she's a village woman with 9 children, self-taught, and participated in the resistance, was imprisoned and tortured. So she's one of my main, kind of my first iconic women, and I filmed many. One of them is Hanan Ashrawi throughout the years. And I'm going to go on to the theme of incarceration again, because after Khadija, here's another film that John and I made called Women Beyond Borders. And this is Kifah Afifi from Shatila camp, who was imprisoned in the Khiyam prison in South Lebanon, tortured, and she spent 7 years. She was only 16 or 17 when she was in prison. So this is her first visit, or first since she was liberated from prison, back to the prison of Khiyam, which was liberated in the year 2000 again. The villagers broke the prison. You know, they broke into the prison and liberated the prisoners. It's such a, powerful like story. Like, it's such a powerful moment, and it's captured on film as well. And Kifah is iconic in the sense of what she's lived through. She's a survivor of Sabra and Shatila. She was a child during the massacre. 3 of her brothers were killed in the massacre and also in the siege of the camps in the years that came later. And but she's so, you feel that she's full of life. She's full of passion. She smiles despite all this suffering. And I think this is like, she's not an only case. You find this a lot in the resilience of Palestinian women. And this is what inspired me to make my feature film after that, 3,000 Nights.
So let me just ask you one thing about, which you've slightly anticipated, but I want to draw attention to the fact that you heard a story in 1987 when you were in Nablus about a woman who had given birth in an Israeli prison and been able to keep her child with her for 2 years. And in all this time, the story grew like a little seed inside you until you made 3,000 Nights.
Yes, exactly. Actually, Khadija was the first one who told me about this woman who had a child. Actually, she named the child Palestine. And when I went to film, so each film is like, it's one film for me. Every film leads to the next. When I went to film in Nablus during the first Intifada, I actually met this woman, the mother of Palestine in Palestine. And she told me her story. It was so dramatic. It was so powerful. She gave birth in chains, and she raised her child behind bars with the other women. And I met all the women who had been liberated by then. And that idea remained in my mind for years, many years, before I made 3,000 Nights. But it was, the film itself is based on a true story. The characters are all based on true characters. The filming took place in a real prison in Jordan. I was very lucky to be able to film it in a real prison. The actors, some of them are non-actors acting for the first time, but even the actors who have professional actors in the film have lived this experience of prison, because every Palestinian has a relative who has been in prison, a brother or sister, mother or father, or even some of my own crew and cast have also been former prisoners themselves. So they were able to bring this experience to the film. And I spent a long time researching, of course. The actors met many of the real characters. The fact that we were filming in a prison really put them in this feeling that they were in a real prison. I shot it as if I also drawing on my documentary experience. I think it's a powerful, I think, tool that you can bring to fiction, especially in the Palestinian context, because the real stories are always so powerful. And in this image, you see it's like you see the bars reflected in Layal's eyes. Here I'll show you a series of images. Here, this is when Layal, the mother, gives birth, and this child is raised by all of the women together. He spends 2 years in the cell with the women, with Layal, even in solitary confinement. She had nothing, no way of really describing this child not knowing the world except through stories, through a toy bird, a wooden bird that was carved for him. And here I tried to go into the imagination also of the child and the prisoners, because imagination really helps overcome, transcend the bars. And I imagined this bird becoming a real bird at one point. And this is a very magical moment for me. And one of the powerful moments again is when the women, and this is based also on true events, there was a major revolt in the prison. And this is in 1982. So in this film, 3000 Nights, I'm revisiting that time because the events that went on in Lebanon, the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, really impacted the prisoners in Palestine. And here's an image of the Palestinian women prisoners watching the news, and then they rebel, and there's a hunger strike. And after the strike, in reality, there was a prisoner exchange, and thousands of Palestinian prisoners were released in exchange for, I think, 6 Israeli soldiers. So all this is in the film. This film was my first feature narrative. It was screened a lot in many places. But for me, the most, meaningful, I think powerful experiences was screening it to the actual Palestinian prisoners in Palestine. And after that, also in Shatila camp. And here's an image of the screening in Shatila camp in the main square of the camp with Kifah again. And we co-presented the film. And it's like, for me, it's like a cycle, starting in 82 in Shatila, and then the screening 3000 Nights again in Shatila with the people. And everyone was so mesmerized actually by the film. Everybody's watching, everyone is reacting. And, to me, it's much more than making films. It's about bringing the films back to the people, about sharing those experiences, about the relationship, the human relationships that arise from the films, those deep connections that are built. And that's why I make films, I think. In the end, it's all about trying to give a voice to the people, trying to reclaim this narrative that has been stolen, and trying to give to tell this narrative through cinema.
Thank you so much, May. They're wonderful, wonderful images. And I can see we've got so many questions for you that I'm going to hand over now to Andrew. And if I have a chance to ask you one more, I'll do it at the end. But let's have the audience ask you questions now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks to both of you really for, generating so many insights, both for folks who are already familiar with May's films and also for those who now have an appetite to see them or to see more of them. And a number of folks have been asking where where they can find the films, and perhaps you can let us know that. But in addition, there's one question here which is a little more pointed from Nancy Murray. She's read Victoria's book and notes that Victoria found a resemblance between Children of Fire and the Battle of Algiers, and wondered if you might want to talk a little more about this.
Yes.
Well, let me just tell you the one image that I saw in Children of Fire, which was a flashback to the great film, The Battle of Algiers, was when you have a complete darkness and then spots of light come up gradually across the city. And in the case of the Battle of Algiers, it's when you're about to have independence. And in, well, I'll let May tell you how very, very different it is in Children of Fire.
Yes, there's a parallel though, because I many years afterwards, I saw both films again. It's when they bring back the martyr in Children of Shatila, our neighbor, the young man that had been killed. And it's under curfew, Nablus. So people, like their voices, you can hear their voices and the lights in the city and the echoes, because it's between two mountains, Nablus. So you hear those voices. It's like so moving, so powerful. It's like one voice all together. And in Battle of Algiers, there's a similar feeling, you know, of empowerment of people. And that's really, it's a powerful moment.
And where can people see your films? May?
Yes, on Amazon Prime, there will be, it'll be 3,000 Nights will be released, I think, in the next month or so. And I'm planning to put all my films online so people can see them for free soon in the next month or so, because I always get this question of how to see the films, especially the older films. So this is one of my plans. I hope in the next month they'll all be online so people can see them. They just go to Google and find them.
Okay. There's a question about whether you've shown any of your films in Israel, and if so, what was the reaction?
I hear a lot that my films are shown in Israeli universities mainly, and venues. And I hear that there's discussions afterwards, and that it's, but these are like people tell me afterwards about this. And I get a lot of, especially when I show them in festivals and there's Israelis in the audience, they're always very moved, sometimes disturbed and troubled. But I think this is important because it makes them think about the reality that they don't maybe know or want to know about. Some of them are already active, and it does. Some of them have told me that my films have had an impact on them. And this is what films are supposed to do, to create awareness and to also motivate people to take action, which I hope is the case.
There's a question about your process. How much of the films are planned, as in a story you wanted to tell and then directed the story, or how much was filmed spontaneously? And I mean, to some degree, I think it also speaks to a comment you made in passing about how it's all one film to you. You're always switched on in a way, and the stories are being fed to you in one fashion or another as you go from one location to another, and then keep returning to these locations. So
that's true. It's like one process, because it's what I'm living, especially in the documentaries. I plan, but I also am open to developing, like in Children of Shatila, a fire, the one in Nablus. There was no way to plan a film like that because it took the shape of being under kind of siege and a journal. So I learned how to make a film. It's like adapting to a reality. So you don't really have a complete plan, but you develop it. But you can learn how to develop it quickly and seize the moment, because it's all about seizing the moment and being able to tell a story with characters and not just film random events. And for example, the liberation of South Lebanon, taking the children, trying to follow your characters within the historical event. And this is the kind of work that I've become used to doing. I think it's a powerful way of telling a story. There are other ways. I mean, with narrative films like 3,000 Nights, of course, it was all written, but based on real stories.
It seems you come out with this blend of almost like a blend of war reporting and ethnography at the same time, which is spontaneous, but still very satisfying, right? So there's a number of questions also about challenges that you faced in not just making the films, which you've already talked about, but also challenges in getting your films distributed and exhibited. And what sort of obstacles did you encounter, and how did you overcome them?
Yes, I think distribution is the biggest challenge for most Palestinian films, and especially in the US, because it's very difficult to get our films in theaters. So, but there's alternative ways. I mean, there's the university circuit, there's the online now. I think it's created a lot of openings for films. There's been censorship. I've faced censorship in some places. But for me, that's a challenge that I like to because it gives the opportunity to be able to confront a situation and overcome it. So they have never been able to censor any of my films, even though there's been attempts to censor them. But that creates an outcry, and all the organizations like start journalism and all that. So it's part of the challenge, and it's not at all easy to distribute or fund Palestinian films, by the way. And it's getting more difficult. But surprisingly enough, you find amazing Palestinian films, amazing films that are coming out from Palestine. Many films made by women. That's something amazing. Also, I think Victoria wanted to mention something about that, didn't you, Victoria?
Well, I wanted you to slightly own the fact that you have very much contributed to that. And I'll just give you one example, that in part of the footage of 3,000 Nights, it was shot by Tamara, who is one of the children in Frontiers. And when I was talking to her while I was doing the book, she was telling me about what an incredible honor it had been, that she always grew up wanting to be like May. And then she got this call that could you film the release of prisoners in Ramallah to be part of the film. And she said, for me, and May of course knew that my father had been in prison for 18 years. So for me to go and do that filming for her and be part of something as big as 3,000 Nights was just incredible. And I want to add to that. I see some questions in the chat about keeping in touch. And I can tell you that all the main characters that you've seen there, all of them either came to May's flat to talk to me sometimes, or we visited their house, or the ones who are far away far away Germany or all sorts of other places, talked to me on Skype because they wanted to honor May. They wanted to say what it had been like working there. And in some cases, they wanted to say, this totally changed my life. Changed my aspirations, it changed my idea of what I could be, what I could do. And, she gets these wonderful calls from, I've had a baby, I've passed my PhD. It's all living. And I think the intimacy that you see in the films is part of the way that she has been part of this community. And when I said, that I think of it as like a tapestry, it is like that. Everybody is involved. And if it's Natalie Handel or Samia or the photographers or Hanan Ashrawi, talk to me for hours about the film that was made, because it's their way of participating in something which is a group endeavor.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Victoria. I guess the last question, because we have to wrap up soon. Last question inevitably is about what you're working on now or looking forward to working on. And as an addendum, someone wanted to know about the Gaza Strip. There seems to be a crying need for films of the kind that you make, reporting from inside the Gaza Strip.
Yes, I'd love to go to Gaza. I will try, definitely, to get access. My next film, I would like to revisit some of the events of the past, but through the eyes of a central character. But I'd like to go back to the Nakba, 1948, and the whole period that came after that through the experience of one character. And I'm working on that already. I'm writing a script. Also, I'm also making a documentary, which I'm finishing in Lebanon, about recent events in Lebanon. I made many films in Lebanon, but for me, I feel that I need to focus on Palestine now because of everything that's going on in Palestine, the whole injustice is so enormous, and the silencing of the Palestinian narrative. It's such a responsibility, I think, for us filmmakers, writers, artists, and to tell that narrative, because that's part of the struggle, and how to tell it in the best possible way. So this is I feel this is the next project. I really have to focus on that.
And Victoria, are you going to be following this project in some fashion?
I'm always talking to Mai. We spent 3 years talking to each other and we haven't stopped.
Victoria is my biggest inspiration. Partners.
Partners.
Always. And thank you, Victoria, always, for this beautiful book you wrote.
Well, unfortunately, we have to terminate what's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much again for bringing all this enlightenment to us about the films, and I'm sure everyone's going to either watch them or rewatch them in the coming months. So thank you again, and thank you to the participants and the interpreters and the tech team for doing a wonderful job as usual. And please join us for the final session of the festival coming up very soon.
And thank you, Andrew, very much for watching the chat for us.
Thank you, Andrew, and to all the team and the organizers of Palestine Writes.
Thank you.